thinking in recent times and share them with you, and then maybe we can have a discussion. So we could just kind of talk about things a little bit. The big idea that I wanted to kind of approach, maybe a few things. On the one hand, like holding this place we've come to in our civilization, this place of unraveling. Well, I also want to give thanks, because just that term, the unraveling, is a Joanna Macy kind of thing, you know, that we're entering this time of unraveling. And all this is just, I brought some books because they're just to remember the foundation upon which a lot of the thinking I'm doing is coming from. There's Carl Jung and James Hillman and this guy, James Russell, Martine Prechtel, and Joanna Macy, or a few of them. And so the first time I went to the INL was in 2012 on a tour of the radioactive cleanup sites through the Idaho National, through the Snake River Alliance. There's a couple members here if you want to raise your hand. I'm a board member too, and always looking for members and board members and people that support their work. So the Snake River Alliance has had a long-term relationship with this site as a group of citizens who care. And the site, of course, wants to bury it all. But the approach today is not as an activist, because it's easy to be on the side of the activist and be like, this is wrong, and it is wrong. But the approach I want to take today is that we have the activist inside us that wants to bring things to light, but also that part that wants to bury it all. It's like, it's us. We can't pretend that's not us. We can't pretend that this is not what we're all engaged in. So it's so easy when looking at this topic to leave that behind and kind of put oneself above the situation. And so I want to keep coming back to this site as a reflection of our collective sickness. And in that way it becomes useful to us as both a guide and a point of orientation from which we can find ourselves, maybe less lost, or recognizing the ways that we're lost, and in that way a little bit more oriented. So that's the hope. I was going to say, the year I went on the first tour of the radioactive cleanup sites was also the year I began a career as a mental health therapist. So for me, looking at this site was, I couldn't not bring with me some of the thoughts of Carl Jung and the shadow, and how we want to just bury, this waste, which is the shadow side of our industrial military complex. So this is dumping barrels of plutonium contaminated waste into unlined pits at the INL, which is situated right over top of our aquifer. So, you get to the site and you're like, how first of all, it's like, maybe I'll get us next slide. There's, you get to the site and it's like, it's a fire hose of technical information coming at you, trying to absorb everything. And yet underneath it all is this sense of something very heavy that's not being looked at. So it took time, but in a couple of years, it was 2014 that I decided to start bringing artists on tours of the radioactive cleanup sites, and then we'd spend a year in contemplation of the site, and then at the end of that year, we'd have a show at Ming Studios, and that project was called Holding What Can't Be Held. And it went on, over the course of the next 10 years, this in a way is a new form of holding what can't be held for me. And so I hope to follow up this with anyone who's interested can join sort of a informal, open, monthly sort of meetup where we look into kind of mythology and think about orientation and perhaps the site as well. So maybe I'll just, the lost, we all are familiar with lostness or homelessness. Martin Heidegger, described the modern condition as one of existential homelessness. It was last summer that my son and I were, this is sort of a little offshoot, but we were going to Bloomington, Indiana, and I was on Priceline. I got some tickets for us. We get there, get to the baggage claim, get our bags, got the car and everything. We came back in because we went to the wrong lot or whatever. And then, it's a little airport, and I put in the place I'm going on MapQuest, and it's 4.5 hours. It should be we had flown to Bloomington, Illinois. And the guy at the baggage claim was like, don't feel dumb, man. Somebody does this every day. Don't feel so stupid. But my friend told me then, when I told him about this, there's a play called Valparaiso, Indiana, about a guy who tries to fly to Indiana and ends up in Chile. Valparaiso, Chile. And so he becomes a media sensation because by the time he gets back, it's the story is just caught fire, and he's this, and it's really a story, a play about homelessness and about dislocation and about being in the wrong place. And it's sort of linked up with this sense of lostness. I was also thinking of revelation. If you put revelation into plain speech in a way, or think about some of the things, just as far as things going all wrong, time and place, in terms of time, even as the fig tree casteth her untimely fig when she is shaken of a mighty wind. Every mountain and stand were moved out of their places. So this sense of dislocation, things moved not where they should be, or we don't know how to orient. When you enter the site, you go to enter anywhere in the site. You stop at a guardhouse, and there's a guard with a rifle and pistol, and you go through the paperwork. And we were be in a van, and you look around, and there's the big pieces of the landscape were. That's me looking into a hot cell on one of the early tours. This is a brick. Let's go one more. Wow, keep going. So here's a big southern butte. There are these huge buttes that are and I didn't, it was 10 years of going before I realized they don't have names. It's Big Southern Butte, East Butte, and Middle Butte are their names. It's just you learn their names, you're oh yeah, Middle Butte, East Butte. But after, I don't know, it just struck me recently that it's those are not names, these are placeholders, and that when you go into the site, there's, if a name is something that has a story attached to it, these are placeholders, just like the names of everything within the site. It's the AMWTP, it's the ARP, it's the TREAT, it's the IWTU, all names of functions. No story there at all. So when we came to this place, we came into a storied place. But the story of our people when we came, it begins in what I call the middle of nowhere. This place was not the middle of nowhere because people have lived there for thousands of years. This was the ancestral lands of the Shoshone and Bannock peoples, part of their ancestral hunting ground, and just part of their range. They would go up to northern Montana and hunt buffalo, and then come down through here and camps, and there's like lava tubes that have all kinds of artifacts in them around the site. And then they'd go down to the Snake River, where it was rich in tools and camas. And so it was a storied place. But when we entered it in 1949, when Idaho was founded, we long since left behind the mythic vision, the storied way of thinking by which we saw ourselves tied to forces that were greater than us. So I'll come back to this more, but why would we bother with myth now when the very stuff of myth seemed to be like bubbling up out of matter itself for us, and that we were going to like use this to power the next Eden. Energy too cheap to meter is what they said. And so this place in the Sagebrush Steppe was where they hoped to make it happen. Now the Shoshone and Bannock people are located about, I think, 50 miles or so to the southeast of the site. And the deer shot within the 900 square miles have to be tested for radiation before hunters can take their game home. But we came into the area like miners to a new frontier, came with wounded vision and didn't see the cycles of beauty in the land around us, but saw what we could use the place for. Like I said, we're looking for a place that was in the middle of nowhere. So to go into a place thinking of what you can use it for, I'm thinking of as a form of fleeing itself. And I'll come back to that too. But this not seeing where you are, but relating to it in a way that you can get to somewhere better. So we came seeking a place that basically was free from consequence. That was why they came out here, because they wanted to be free from consequence. And so that freedom from consequence was what we mined out of the middle of nowhere. A place that's free from consequence does not exist, of course, and underneath this ground is like a treasure of our whole land. Is this like underlying 10,000 square miles of southeastern Idaho is the Snake River Aquifer, but we were seeking. So one way to think of this, is that the place we were seeking was called nowhere, that was a place inside ourselves that we projected outwardly on the landscape of the Arcoa Desert. So in other words, unconsciously, this was a way to make a ritual beginning. So in this place, so removed from any kind of belonging, we would once again shatter the relational bonds that tied us to the landscapes of home, and in doing so, ritually reenact the forgotten beginnings of our collective flight and subsequent homelessness. Now, like the alchemists of old, who found their inner gold within matter, we have found our restlessness in the very materials that are the byproduct of our flight. Materials whose self-shattering will continue by way of chain reaction down through the ages. Where else but the middle of nowhere could we have simulated the crossing of the Atlantic Ocean in a 300,000-gallon tank of water in the middle of the Arcoa Desert? This was where they developed the SW2, which S1W actually, sorry, where the prototype of the first nuclear-powered submarine. And in that lineage of the submarine was maybe slide. Let me see.
Go this way.
I don't know if
Okay, I've got that one.
In that lineage was the SSN 666, the Devil Boat, whose 20-foot or so sail is outside of Arco, on the road outside of Route 20, yes, is it right? That goes through Arco, just across from Pickles Place, home of the Atomic Burger. So, There's like a little gazebo, outside with a little sleeve in which you can read about the devil boat, and has the number from the quote from Revelation. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So, what happens when we enter a landscape wanting what we want, wanting to get what we want, and then we keep getting it? There's this idea that Jung has of the gods, which really are just the forces of nature, those forces that are bigger than us, that we have connection to, that we have split our connections to. Those gods, when they're unacknowledged, they don't just disappear. That they become then our illnesses, our neuroses, and our obsessions. So the gods push to extremes. When we place ourselves at the center, the gods push to extremes, and the broken relationships left in our wake, and all the unfelt pain chasing us through the generations. Which kind of brings me back to the waste and the materials that we've created, and the way that these materials are kind of calling the shots in a way. At the site, everything, the closer you get to the materials, the more they are directing everything that happens at the site. So you enter a buffer zone, and you're not supposed to, don't touch your face or your mouth with your hands, and no chewing gum, no anything. You're getting your hands and feet screened every time you go in and out. There's so many, in a way, the site, as I kind of see it, is almost like itself, like a Greek play that's sort of layered with layers and layers of irony, that you could, you unpack, and you see more and more of our, it's as if what we don't want to see in ourselves is enacted on a literal level at the site. So, coming back to the shadow and Jung's idea that what you don't make conscious in your inner world will come to you from without as fate. So here we are burying the. So we created we went to the middle of nowhere to try to find a place where we could do these experiments with matter. And well, if you're in the middle of nowhere, you might as well, have that be the spot where you're going to bury the entire waste from the milling of plutonium cores of our nuclear arsenal. So that happened in Rocky Flats. And so from 1954 to 1990, the INL was on the receiving end of all the waste from the milling of plutonium that created our entire nuclear bomb arsenal. So again, just to balance that with how this sickness is outside myself, but it's me. How to kind of bring, how is this sickness mine? But so when I first, and I guess when I first went to the site, I had the sense that there was something to this idea of sitting. I mean, in therapy, it's like you sit with what has been sort of buried, with the idea that there's some worth or some value to that. That in a way, if you don't, you're always running on some level. So to come back to the shadow is a form of homecoming. So when I first sat with the idea of plutonium, and this is a substance that will be toxic for 240,000 years, and the reality that is buried over this treasure of our land, it stopped me. And I had really known that I'd been running, but for a moment it kind of stopped me. And it stopped me in the way that always imagining oneself headed towards somewhere better, like always something better ahead. And in a way, this is maybe how thieves think, or ghosts. Before you know it, you're no longer telling stories around a fire, but are wanting something better than what's here. Before I know it, I'm thieving myself. Instead of experiencing the pleasure of a moment, I've tucked the pleasurable experience into my belt just to get on my way a little quicker. If I'm successful at maneuvering my way to the front, everything seems to be going swimmingly, but it's the hurrying itself that feeds a systematic extraction from the present moment that's occurring simultaneously on such a large scale it's hard to imagine. Just so, our story of technological progress, with always the promise of something better, leaves us and the landscapes around us impoverished. So, confronted with a substance whose toxicity extends nearly forever, paired with the necessity of attending to it for time frames I couldn't grasp, something in me clicked. No amount of running would ever outpace those 240,000 years. So this is what it is to maintain relation with something that's going to be presenting itself for that long. You know, to not just like want to bury it and put it away. The site itself is kind of, it is made up of 9 separate facility clusters, all like in different spots along the, connected by straight roads. I tend to think of it as 2 main parts. The parts that's trying to deal with the waste management side of the site, and then there's the new development side of the site. And the waste development is just like, they're just doing what they have to do. You know, I mean, they want to put it, they're going to put a cap over this buried waste. It's a 1,000-year cap. And we were like, you know, what about after that? And they're like, well, I won't be around then, you know. It's like, one more little piece here. The first time I kind of heard something intriguing about nuclear waste was Michael Jones, one of the founders of the Snake River Alliance, we're getting our coats at a thing, and he mentioned this woman, Joanna Macy, and I hadn't heard of her at the time, and he said how she had the idea of putting the waste into, or that we should build temples to hold the waste. And to me, this really caught my imagination, and you know, I imagine what is it to stay in relation to that in us that is so broken, and what would it mean to hold that tension over time, or to consider that it's not just put a 1,000-year cap on it and be like, whew. You know, it like brings up the sense that there's something bigger at stake here, not just us, but in a time beyond us. So, yeah, I guess, you know, what is the sense of longing that meets that kind of, that could meet those kind of time frames? So there's these 2 sides. You know, the waste cleanup side, though, is dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. So they're in it. And they're billion-dollar projects. These are huge. I mean, it's incredible what they're doing there. I mean, and pretty just down. It's like digging 15 years of a track hoe. You know, digging up waste and then going through it by hand. The new development side is, the waste is not, it just slipped, the idea slips through like water through a sieve. It's inconsequential to them. And Beatrice Brailsford, always like this, she's used to be the nuclear program director at the Snake River Alliance, would always say that the R&D part of the lab has more money than God. It just always made me chuckle, just the way she said, They had more money than God. I'm gonna say that. It was like a riddle though too. So it made me think just the way that the site, everything about it hinges on something so small, and everything about it is so big. From the destructive power of it, the fact that they're trying to create this endless wellspring of energy, and the way that the waste itself goes on for these huge time frames. So everything about it would seem that we're trying to push out of the human realm and into the realm of the gods. So a few years ago, we were going through the R&D part of the lab, and one of the artists, an artist friend, was got in a conversation with the lead engineer of the Marvel as the comic book, Marvel micro reactor. The whole feeling of the thing was like giddy. It's just like, there's more money than God, and like, we're gonna make this thing, and we're gonna mass produce it in factories, and everyone's gonna have micro reactors, and it's like this sense of buoyancy that's just like, woo! And she asked him what might be done about radioactive waste, the problem with it. All these waste that keeps accumulating, and all the reactors around the country. And his thing was, we should put it into an impenetrable canister and shoot it into oblivion. That was this engineer's thought about that. It's easy to be like, look upon this as like, as from above, as if I'm superior as an environmental activist. But this is like the ride we're on. Is kind of, so we're all in the same boat. Everything in me wants to overlook the reality of radioactive waste, and somehow, it's as if it's connected to this sense of inner desolation, of which I'm always wanting to outpace as well. The need of our age is so big. In his essay, Oedipus Revisited, James Hillman notes that the play begins with the sick city, not just the people in it, but the city. He writes, "For Oedipus, or for any one of us, to find one's father and the truth of oneself is not enough, because there is a murder in the order of the world, and the world and the soul are inseparable. That is why the longing in the play is so intense. The world must be restored, not only its men and women." So, like Oedipus, we want to believe the riddle of the Sphinx has an answer, and we just say it, we'll be done, 1,000-year cap, done with it, and then join the class of vanquishing superheroes who always win the day, like Harry Potter and Superman, and all the superheroes that were created out of nuclear waste. But also Perseus, going on and on, back to Gilgamesh and others whose monster-killing stories are a facade for the rape and pillage of a conquering civilization, and more fundamentally for the subjugation of nature herself. So, if then upon realizing that we're to be like, I'm getting rid of all those bad stories about Superman and Perseus, then we'd be doing more of the exact same thing. So, James Hillman also refers to this tendency in the therapy room. The solutions imagined by the patient for his illness belong to the image of the illness. So when the sick city imagines the way to health, it's still, the way to health is an expression of the same sickness. So we're all in the process of trying to outspend God. It doesn't help to tell ourselves to slow down. We just have to remember when we approach the affliction in front of us that's equally embedded within us. So I'm going to just go on a little thing here. Maybe it'd be good to like open it up a little bit, or like loosen things up for people thinking. I wanted to kind of go through a little history of the site and kind of talk about like really explicitly how it is enacting kind of a shadow of what was happening at that time. But is there anything that wants to like pop up from you guys? Okay, because we're all. This is a yeah.
In talking to various members of the staff that are, maybe day-to-day dealing with the waste, do you feel that people who have an existential dread have been long filtered away and that they're just kind of doing their task and not considering it?
It's a really good question. Even as someone who's coming from outside, as trying to think about this, you get in there and it's like you're just in a construction site, and you're just like, this is just what you do, and you get into that way of thinking. It's like, yep, okay, watch your step, okay, watch my step, like just like big deal is made of tiny little, like they're all the little safety things are like feel accentuated, but because they're just this is what you do on an industrial site.
I just want to go to this picture of.
So who are the majority of the people that work there?
Everybody. I mean, anybody who want to have hands in this room of anyone they know or works at the site. Or, I mean, let me just say that, a couple of people. Every year of doing Holding What Can't Be Held, we have like 8 or so artists. Somebody had a close, intimate family member that was at the site. Like their dad, their brother, their mom, their blah blah blah.
So I'm curious whether the scientific part, the proactive, have more money than God, are the science people, and then who are the people? I bet there isn't a difference between the who works in the. Because I would bet
it's more the site. It's more a difference in the site than the people, as far as I understand it.
Okay.
Yeah, they all. There's engineers on both sides.
Okay.
Solving problems, and the engineers on the side of the new development are solving problems about creating this like amazing thing. It's gonna like solve the world problems, and then the ones on the other side are like, you gotta. It's no win. It's impossible to manage. So it's no win thing. But you're just like doing the best we can, And they did really great work, especially compared to other sites across the country. Like it's a successful cleanup operation, and that's why we were allowed to tour it for so many years. Because,
during your time doing this, have you talked to anyone who argues that nuclear energy is much cleaner and safer than coal and natural gas?
Everybody's everywhere. It's everywhere.
That argument's out there big time for sure.
Oh yeah, and the women, like they had their environmental when the micro reactor guy came, they had their environmental lawyer. I'm sure very well paid. Like it's good. It's good money. It's good. Good money.
There's like a Moms for Nuclear Energy group website in California. That's really powerful and stuff.
Yeah.
It is Moms.
So I'll just run through a little history. So, and I'll read some from this and maybe speak a little bit. But as a civilization, we've definitely been running before we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But after 1945, the urgency of our flight increased, no doubt. And instead of contending with the horrors of our actions, we were smitten by a utopian dream. Like it's just like it was just like a way to turn, pivot. It was a pivot. So, what can we do with this this wonder? What are we going to do with it? So while the Jetsons zoomed effortlessly across TV screens throughout Middle America, the vision of a nuclear-powered Eden was crystallizing in our collective mind's eye. And it was founded, that's why it was founded, to fulfill that dream. It's where we set out to find what wonders we could do. And it's where we used nuclear fission, first time created electricity with the EBR-1. They lit up the town of Arco with the Borax-3 a few years later in the middle of the night for an hour. first town ever lit up by nuclear energy. And then the powers that be were wanting to get in on this, so the Air Force and the Navy both were vying to have their version of the Holy Grail built, which was a vehicle that could just go without needing to refuel. And that was the things we were going to try to do there. And we could go into the nuclear aircraft more. It's kind of also interesting in its own way. But just to come back to nuclear fission is how we get plutonium. And plutonium is what we use to make the cores of our nuclear bombs. So it's just always good to remember, like, we need plutonium for our bombs, and the way to get it is through nuclear fission. To understand plutonium as part of our collective shadow, it's worth noting that it comes from Pluto, the Romanized version of the Greek god Hades, so presides over the land of the dead. It's also worth considering the zeitgeist in 1954, when we first started to try to make it disappear. So when we first started, like, bury the shit, that's was 1954, and it had been 9 years since we dropped the bombs, and the auto industry was booming like never before. The polio vaccine had just been discovered. 1954 was the first mass vaccination of children against polio. It was also the advent of fast food. 1954 was the first Burger King was built. 1955, the first McDonald's franchise opened in Des Plaines, Illinois, debuting its famed golden arches and its speedy service system inspired by Henry Ford's automobile assembly line. Along with the mass eradication of disease, the nuclear age seemed to be ushering in new levels of convenience, comfort, and freedom of mobility. So the dominant faction of American society was feeling unbridled hope in this dream of progress that featured the primacy of the individual. As it happened, 1954 was also the first and only documented case of an individual being hit by an object that had fallen from outer space, when a 4-kilogram piece of meteorite fell through a roof, badly bruising Ann Hodges, who'd been napping on her couch in Sylacauga, Alabama, establishing indisputable link between human life on Earth and oblivion. Take that. While the meaning of such cosmic echolocation must be left to the great mystery, what's certain is that when a culture elevates the individual above all else, it not only gives rise to an increasingly superficial worldview, but it loses the capacity to incorporate death into its cosmology in a meaningful way. Such a world manages death the way we manage radioactive waste, by keeping it out of consciousness for as long as possible. No wonder then that in the 1950s, when spring runoff made a giant pond out of open pits of radioactive waste, standard protocol was to shoot the barrels, floating barrels, to sink them. There's one in there.
Is that?
It's worth looking at. It's just,
Do we have one of them shooting the barrels?
No, just the pond.
Oh, here, I see it.
There it is, yeah. So these are kind of like, they're engineers, but it's kind of like it's like, these are boys. Shooting those barrels. As parallel to Jung's psychological rule of what you don't look at inside comes to you as fate, is this idea that when you stop telling the old stories is when you start stepping directly into them. So, in the same way that the myth of Oedipus turns on a single prophetic threat, the entire nuclear industry has been driven by existential threat from the start. Whether all-out nuclear holocaust or the climate crisis of today, the sense of imminent peril and the urgency behind it has provided the industry with both justification for its existence and pushed experimentation to heights of absurdity. So, they not only blasted engines on nuclear airplane engines on railroad tracks and push reactors to criticality, just blowing the radioactive cores across the desert. These days, Idaho has test reactors that can simulate the same accident conditions, but the same psychology continues. I touched on the idea of heroes and heroism a little bit, and I just wanted to talk about this guy's work, James Russell, who describes an ancient kind of hero. It's the hero of the old epics. And they go way back, but more recently there's the epic of, the Iranian epic of the Kayanians, and where Vitsap chooses death over eternal life in a magical bronze fortress. And then there's the Indian Mahabharata, in which Arjuna is counseled to fight, even though the battle will mark the end of a world age. So Russell talks about the way that what makes an epic is this sense of like ending. The heroes die, and that's kind of, they die for things that are bigger than them, even if it's just this idea of like fame. So he then goes up to point out a shift that's reflected cross-culturally, and describes the ancient pagan epic of the Narts, whose story is paralleled more recently by an Armenian epic of Sassoon. The Nart epic is like 3,000 or more, 4,000 years old. And they're people from the Caucasus. So a lot of people of European origin, Scythian people, they kind of all mixed in that area of the Caucasus. And these are some of their stories. But they portray a long line of heroes, a number of these epics, and they arrive generationally at protagonists who, instead of welcoming the reality of death, try to get around it. And so as a result, they are cursed by their fathers to live inside a mountain until the end of time, neither living nor dying. Russell writes, clinging more to life than man must, they receive ironically the penalty of an endless life not worth living. So in that epic, the Narts, Artavas rebels against his father's death rites, an act that condemns him to be chained inside of Mount Ararat and to never see the light, only to break loose in the apocalyptic age. Russell writes, down to the high Middle Ages, smiths would strike their anvils thrice on the first workday of the week, or else during the celebration of Navasar, the New Year, to strengthen the chains of the imprisoned apocalyptic prince. Thus, a religious element of the pagan epic survived at least a millennium in folk memory. So centuries later, in the Armenian epic of Sassoon, the hero Mur, who in his flight from death not only suffers a loss of vitality and is rendered infertile, but is likewise cursed by his father. May you enter and remain in carven rock, Raven's Rock. May you not see the world, deathless Cain. May 3 crumbs be your daily food. I have invoked God. So, in this engineer's fantasy of the impenetrable canister, finds precedent in these rock caves that become the forever home of heroes who have spurned death. The patterning that got us to where we are is not new. Imprisoned in rock for their hubris, these apocalyptic princes are a distant echo of the material byproducts of our nuclear striving, for they both suffer the same curse, to live on down through the ages, burning with malcontent, imprisoned, whether in concrete or in a deep geologic repository, until the end of time. And who's to say that this work of nuclear fission, shattering the deep connective force within matter, isn't the apocalyptic prince himself, breaking out of his imprisonment within Mount Ararat, the very same mountain on top of which the biblical Noah landed the ark to begin a new world age after the great flood. So then it was centuries after Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, after the Nart sagas, the Oedipus Rex could be imagined then as tracing perhaps the same rupture of heroic ethic as it turns on itself and compounds into full-blown sickness. Here, Oedipus's father, Laius, repeats a motif that appears at the founding of numerous civilizations, including Rome. He tries to kill his infant son, rather than risk being killed himself when that child came of age. So how does the child come of age with a father who never fully grown up himself? Russell describes the Greek play of Alcestis, who tracks the plight of Admetus, who upon facing death is engaged in his own form of running. According to Russell, the man who chases about asking parents, he goes around just like trying to get everyone to die in his place, basically. So, in that play. So he says, the man who goes about asking other people to die for him, parents and relatives, that is, to assume his burden of the human condition, is resisting adulthood, part of which is the recognition and acceptance of one's own mortality. Referring to Admetus and others, Russell suggests such naive struggles with angels exemplify the unripe aspect of man's cultural youth. So like I was saying, here at the site, we created these airplane engines, maybe you can find them in there. Out there shooting barrels and trying to make these engines that are just going to fly and fly and fly. And they imagine maybe the president, in case there was a nuclear holocaust, the president and his cabinet could be held aloft above it all. For maybe a week or more. There's even a menu. They made a menu for the engines. It's pretty great.
Eating at home.
Apricot nectar, chicken with gravy, potatoes and corn.
Look at the breakfast of the first day, though. Eating at home.
Yeah, this is like a real dream they have. They the blueprints for the things. They designed a special drawer to put their underwear into it.
That's important.
Yeah, it's important, you know. What are you gonna do? They were into this idea of a vessel. Like the limiting factor of the vessel would be like, how much food could you carry on the thing? That's what they were. This is like this. They really were possessed. They were possessed by a utopian dream. And so the other side of that possession is this weight, this heaviness, and death. Plutonium. So,
Where is this menu written? Just out of
it's
curiosity.
on the site. They have at the back of the EBR1 museum, INL museum. They have the engines there, the back of the parking lot, and actually they have it it's kind of in front of that little building in between the engines. You can check out the menu. So here we are. We've left the heroic age well behind us. We come to our current age, where the values of the collective have devolved into pretty extremely, into childish, me-first fantasies, where those who resist the burden of the human condition are not cursed, but exalted. Far from welcoming death, the heroes of today devise ingenious ways to get around it. Nuclear engineers, after all, are not seeking renewable energy. They are seeking energy that never dies. With its dreams of an endless wellspring within matter, and airplanes and submarines that go and go and go without having to refuel, since the very beginning, the INL has been trying to bypass the death part of the life cycle, bringing to fruition an ancient curse. One that's no longer just a story, but now a story that through systematic repetition has concretized into physical substances that for 36 years, as if by fate, were sent in massive quantities to the middle of nowhere, INL, for disposal. So, once plutonium has been created, there's no going back. Its toxicity will outlast any container we can build to hold it, and we can't go back. So, but also nor can we keep running towards a future solution, because to do so we keep enriching the shadow that's already enveloping us. So we have to reckon with where we've come to. But there's something, an alchemical idea the great work of alchemy, it starts with a phase they call the blackening. James Hillman describes this stage as black dissolves meaning and the hope for meaning. We are thus benighted. So like the caterpillar that turns to goo inside a cocoon, it's not like the caterpillar mechanically shifts into a butterfly. It actually like turns into like a goo. It's just like goo. And then there's apparently these, what are they called? Imaginal cells? Somebody call it? That like lead the way towards this like new becoming. It's truly, it's organic. It's not mechanical. So it's like a caterpillar that turns to goo inside of a cocoon. Hillman describes it as breaking down the inner cohesion of any fixed state. So it's kind of where we get left. But when kind of contemplating and being with this, and the good thing about that, it's described in alchemy, it's like a death, it's putrefaction, it's like all these, mortification, that stage, but it's also the beginning. It's like a real place of beginning. So it's the only place from which something new could emerge. So as we swallow the bitter medicine, then the beauty of the world, I think, becomes more available to us. And with it comes the understanding of what's been lost, the way we are all implicated, and the grief of it. And so nothing new is going to happen without grief about where we've come to. So maybe out of that grief, something new could emerge. Martin Hartel has said something like if we include ourselves in the vision of what we're trying to create, it's just more of the same. But so he always kind of harps on this idea of feeding a time of hope that's beyond our own. Because if we work toward a reality, knowing we're never going to get to see it ourselves, that's to work ourselves more deeply into the present. Then, perhaps like the heroic epics of old, we ourselves could be the worthy ending from which something new and worthwhile emerges. So that's kind of, I made, as part of Holding What Can't Be Held, these, with people, I kind of did some workshops and we made death masks. So we, with blindfolds on, kind of shaped faces with clay that were, and then, people didn't want them, so I put them out in the yard after. and the cool thing was, I was like, that was the neatest part of the whole thing, is that they started to live. Like, the mass started to speak with these greater forces around them. So it was kind of cool to see that, things, they went through all, I was photographed, oh wow, more changes they do, all cracked, and it was pretty fun to see that kind of life happening. That's pretty much, there's this somewhat relevant quote here of, this is Martin Hartel. The ancestors live in the future. After all, they've got where you're going long before you've got there, and have all the cooking fires going to greet you with a feast when you arrive. If culture is such that dying is not about this, then the living start fleeing death because they're afraid no one or nothing is waiting for them there. This fleeing is what gives civilization its destructive character. But true culture knows our future is the past, waiting for us when we die to show up to the feast of life, after which we all get to work becoming the roots of the past to feed the living now. So, maybe I'll stop there. questions, yeah?
I just wanted to make a comment.
Yeah.
Having gone
Yeah.
through the show at INL also,
Yeah,
number one, on the R&D side,
yeah,
the stuff that they have there is incredibly cool. Everything is shiny and special, and people are working there. They have one of these hot rooms that has old used, it has radioactive like gloves and hammers and stuff like that in it. You're looking through like a foot of
4 feet.
oil glass,
yeah,
so that, you know, the radioactivity doesn't come through. And young guys are standing there in front of it, working these remote grabbers
Yeah.
in there, like some giant game. And they're totally into it. And they're moving these little, they can grab a tiny little thing and move it and put it on a table over there because somebody's gonna come and work on it through this thing. So it's phenomenally cool, and it just, like you say, here's all this cool stuff, shiny, amazing technology that just smells like death. It smells heavy and astonishingly awful. The other thing I want to say is, I've heard that there are people who, looking at the other side now, the waste side, kind of like the sewage system of the whole thing, people say, oh, no problem, just reprocess it. Reprocess all the stuff, like composting the sewage, and they're finished.
yeah.
Yeah.
Always looking for solutions, and it's like you said, it's very charismatic. Like it's like a charismatic,
Oh,
shiny person, right? Like a narcissistic front. Like, look at this, look what I can do. It's really, yeah.
But am I right that I mean, this is not just historic. I think, if I remember reading or hearing somewhere, that they have gotten a lot of money to begin building more stuff.
So yeah, so the way the situation as it is, as I understand it, the INL is now, during Trump's first presidency, was named the I think New Reactor Innovation Center. It's the U.S. hub for new reactor design and building. So they're pairing with private companies. So any private company that has the money and wants to build a prototype reactor can come to the INL and use the infrastructure and their expertise, and they'll partner with them to build something. Yeah, so it's like we have here the hub of the new, what they hope will be the next nuclear renaissance will be here. You know, like they want, like the early days, they want that to happen again.
But having so much cash, I mean, they're constantly advertising for scientists to end up in ARCO and from around the world. And they have so many different kinds of projects that go far beyond energy. I mean, they're in soil microbiome and, things that are at the cutting edge.
Curiosity.
Yeah, cutting edge of all these different fields, just because they have so much money.
Yeah.
While they're stripping away NIH and NSF.
Yeah. So I'm believing God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you feel, anybody who's been there, like, I know I've just driven by, I know, but I've never gotten too close, only accidentally when I make that turn, and then I'm like, oh shit, I'm like here and I'm on camera. But do you feel like you've been exposed, or that you're like toxic? I mean, I'm just being serious. Like, don't you worry about it?
I worry every time I've gone. I get nervous about it. Yeah. And then you get, it's invisible. It's but then it's also so normalized. Like even as you're being told, like, yeah, you don't touch your face with your hand. Don't shoot. You don't have any gum, right? Like they don't. And then you're like, oh shit, but you know, even as you're being told that, they're like, yeah, I've been working here 10 years, no, never a single incident. This is all just, you know, in case something does happen, if there is something, you know, like, you'll find out later because someone has a badge, apparently, that would pick it up, and when they send the thing in, it's not like a buzzer goes off, but you know, they send it back, and then you might find out some weeks later, like, oh, you got some dose and something. But accidents, you know, they have happened throughout. Accidents are just part of being human. And another piece, you know, there's so many like threads of like one could draw, but the theme of accidents and is definitely and human.
That was an accident? Part of being human.
That was a human test. You're human over there. Good.
I've heard a lot of people bring up the idea of like who is working there and what are the thought processes of the people working either on the new development side or the cleanup side. And I just wanted to share what I feel like is maybe an analogous experience that I've had and being trained as a natural scientist. And my first job I was tasked with in grad school was identifying human skeletal remains from archaeological sites in the Southwest that had been collected by the Forest Service in the 60s and 70s because people in the art market had been looting these sites to sell pottery, but they couldn't sell the bones. So these bones were just being strewn around on public lands, and the Forest Service said, we have to do something. We'll collect them and we'll send them to a university, and it's their problem now. And at the time I was doing it, I think I really thought like I'm part of this, the cleanup of this original sin of having collected and taken these ancestors from their resting place, right? And so I really relate to the like mindset or the idea of the person whose their job is so, like no pun intended, like so atomized that what they're doing seems like corrective. And it really takes, for me at least, it took like getting a sort of distance from the discipline as a whole to recognize the complicity and like a true like intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
And so I guess I feel that sense of like relation with the scientists who are trying to do what they feel is corrective, but can't get the distance to see it's, you know, the way that we're all implicated.
Exactly.
So that's not a question, but
No, that's great. That's really
just an
so
analogy, I guess.
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's, you enter that framework and you're just in it. And so much comes with that framework. Like my brother, who's like a engineer and environmentally conscious, went to work for Ford, and I just noticed like he started talking about the same yeah, I mean, if we all went back to horses, you know, there'd be like shit, like there'd be disease everywhere because the horses would just be God have cars. You know? But it just happens. You get in there and you're just doing your job, and it's sort of like the whole mindset of whatever you're doing comes into you.
I guess I do have a follow-up question. It's not truly based on that, but I keep thinking what we said about the 1,000-year cap. To me, that seems like the most like petulant amount of time. Like, this won't be my problem. It won't be my children's problem. It won't be my grandchildren's problem. Like, and thinking about your emphasis on myth. Like, myth only really works if you're at a generational scale. Like, is there a reason they don't make it like this cap has to be reinstalled every 50 years? Like, I'm going to install it. My children are. It's kind of a different idea. But I guess I'm curious to hear what you think about. What role can myth play in having like each generation sharing that accountability of this process? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like it comes down to love on some level, that more than myth, it has to be infused with like some love. Because no one's gonna to be with the reality of that waste and its longevity means like the cap on it is like release of tension, right? Like just think of holding that tension for that long is like no one. Why would you do it except for love? You know, like this sense of something bigger. So, but the temple, yeah, that's why I feel like the temple is right. That there's some, but not the kind of temple that's like not so rote or something. Not so, It's just hard to look ahead that far, and like what, and that's the poignancy of that is part of like what we have to bear, I guess, is how I see it.
These conversations are so essential, and also it's really heavy to carry. Like, how do we, some of these things, there's a level of core that's actually in some ways hard to touch. Like, I feel like the 1,000-year thing is almost a cartoonish amount. So it becomes this nebulous in the middle of nowhere. I mean, that sounds like an indie movie from the 90s or something, but it probably was, Baghdad Cafe. But, but the piece about the grief and the love, it's like, how do we carry the grief? How do we experience the grief, but not let it swamp? I mean, it's Joanna Macy, Pectel, all of them. How do we have the grief that shows how much we love it, so that we keep going, so that there's also the beauty? I mean, because I just, no offense, but I couldn't sit here and listen to this lecture every fucking day. I would go down. This is so heartbreaking, but it's also, it's like, how do we get out of bed every day? Also, when there are people who I think really do think that they're doing good things. They really do think that they're trying to make it better. And it's really confusing these days, sort of that the arrogance and who's right and who's wrong and all of this separatism. But anyway, so kind of a rambling thought, but I guess it comes back to the grief and the love for me, and how do we alchemize
I really love that question. Yeah, thanks for it's really thoughtful. I almost just want to leave the question, but leave that open to consider. But I guess it brings me to, in a way, this idea of like, Jung had this idea of amplification. That we could, if you saw, say you had this dream or something came to you, or you're struggling with something, and you could amplify it out into the mythic realm, there was something liberating about that. And I almost imagine this as a backwards process. That like, if we see this big thing as it's a whole diorama, and that we can take like the INL as a picture of the whole, of the sickness of the whole, but we can't each hold that big sickness, but that I can only hold my little piece of it, so that when but sometimes my own little piece of it feels like just like too much, So, but there's something about when I understand that sickness as a piece of a bigger pain or something, that I can hold my part of it in a way, without having to hold the whole thing.
Many hands make light more, sort of.
Oh, but I have just my part. Everyone has their part of it to hold. It's smaller. That we can do things. That we can.
I think on this topic that the resiliency to continuously encounter this dark side is a muscle we collectively have to cultivate. We don't do it that well. we're really good at denial. We're really good at this escape into fantasy or ideology or anything that gets us away from confronting this every day, or else we wouldn't be able to function, right? If we continuously confronted this stuff. So I think thinking of it at that level of how would we develop a resiliency, a muscle that we're doing this, because it's exactly what our society is meant to not do.
Yeah.
You know, I just spent the past all semester trying to teach college students to confront this dark side of modernity, and in particular this last week, reading a book by Achille Mbembe, Necropolitics, which is one of the darkest books you're gonna read. It's exactly the opposite of a growing life. It is how our modern world is just destroying life. And they are so resistant. And they have so many ways to avoid, so many psychological mechanisms to avoid confronting this thing. And they get upset at me. Why are we still reading this? And so, you know, like, how you keep that tension. And I don't think we know how to do that, but that would be one direction.
Yeah, if I can link, say, my sense of plutonium to a feeling inside me, then I can work with it somehow. You know, like if I can be like, okay, I'm do this running thing, right? Like I'm eating my food and I take a bite and I'm like, I'm chewing my food and I already have the next bite like it's ready to go. Like, and then I eat that bite and then by the time like I have the last bite in my mouth, like I'm like up before I'm even. It's like, okay, what is there that I'm like fleeing? So if I can like settle back into that a little bit, that movement is kind of like I have to contend with something, and I think Stelios, like building. It just takes building that muscle on it. I think there's like that would be say an example of doing it on an individual level, but I think there's ways like Joanna Macy created this way to do it collectively, where she has, you have these like 4 stations, and like we could do it, if you guys want to, like we could. God, that's cool. Like one station is a bunch of dry leaves, and another station is an empty bowl, and another station is a rock, and another station is a stick, and the stick is anger, outrage, and the rock is fear, and the dry leaves are grief, and the empty bowl is helplessness. And every one of those has a other side. Like it takes courage to be able to speak your fear. You have a sense of justice if you can speak your outrage, and it's the other side of helplessness would be like just it's an empty bowl, anything potential there. And the other side of grief is that love. So you have those stations set up, and you have a group, and people just they feel called, go in and just speak. It could be from the personal life, but also relates something big, and you can move station to station, and you kind of witness together. And it's this like, she called it in the part of her work that reconnects. It's like feeling the pain of the world, and then you come out of that with like she said like seeing with new eyes is sort of the stage after that, So I think there's collective ways too, but they're not like there. It's a cool like idea to like how can we start to kind of create more ways to work that muscle collectively. Yeah, I really like that.
I like your concept of building a temple.
Yeah.
Especially if it's going to have like 1,000-year longevity, and then something's going to have to be done. And so then we have to pull together a community that has oral tradition, teaching each next generation what to do with this temple. that is going to erode in 1,000 years because there won't be regulatory anymore and there won't be laws and maybe we don't even have fuel for bulldozers or concrete. So we have to come up with, you know, contingency plans and actually have that maybe be a societal glue that is passed on orally, you know, parent to child.
Yeah. Yeah.
1,000 years ago.
Well, the 1,000-year cap is their thing. You know, that's what they're doing. That's their solution. That's their solution,
Yeah, but
which is
1,000
different than temple.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but like,
but we have to do something in 1,000 years, so someone's got a calendar.
yeah.
But 1,000 years is only 1,000 of 240,000. Isn't that the number you
Yeah.
said?
240.
Right, exactly. So you have
It's
to
like less than a
continue
percentage
to
of, like,
maintain it
yeah.
every 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully somebody comes up with some
Other solution.
during those 240,000 people like, oh, maybe.
Send it to space.
I know, that's what my parents they shoot it into the sun because sun's very nuclear.
Right. Shooting in the sun.
When you say rote temple, what do you mean?
Say what temple?
You said rote temple when you first referenced John and Macy's.
I did.
You did, and I was just thinking where we were earlier.
Rote temple.
Not a rote temple. So I don't know. I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah. Not a rote temple.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I meant like a living, like not like to me. It seems like there would have to be some living kind of because right now the temple, it is a temple sort of. You know, like people are in service to these materials. So the temple's there, but the way they're going about it is in a more rote kind of way. It's like there's not like heart. I mean, I don't know how you. I'm not saying like they should be doing differently, so much as like I don't know. Maybe they could though. What would it be to like because like you. It's all acronyms. Like you step into it, it's like go to the you know. But if you say the long names, you'd be speaking robot. You know, let's go to the advanced mixed waste treatment thing right now, shall we? Actually, we have to go to the accelerated retrieval project. Okay. like, yeah, that doesn't work. But maybe they come up with more beautiful names for the thing. You know, then it'd be less rote in my mind if like. They created sort of reasons for lingering, you know, in that space because that's what a temple like is. You have to have a reason to linger in that place. But there, like you want to say the abbreviated word as fast as you can and just get done with your job.
I was just going to say one way that many small-scale societies keep their belief system going is to have initiations. You get to a certain age, you're initiated into the mysteries of that belief system. So that would be when people would learn about the history of the thing, about the accumulated dangers, about the effects on society. I'd be glad to work on that.
Right. Do it.
I'm curious about the connection, or if there is a connection between the idea of beautiful names for the mechanical pieces and names or placeholders for the buttes.
Yeah.
I would love your thoughts on that.
I mean, to me, just the connection between the buttes as like placeholders and these like very functional names. Is that what you mean? Like
Yeah.
I mean the placeholder thing, it's just again I think it relates to that thing of lingering and like not wanting to be in this, like everything's for a use, you know, like the buttes are named just so you can know which one's which. It's like it's like so
But don't you think that
transactional.
they
Like,
erased the Shoshone? The Shoshone probably did have
Well,
names
no
for
doubt.
those buttes.
Yeah.
That would be something that you really would want to sort of go back to.
it would tell a story.
They-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And there's now a relatedness to the place. Thus, like this idea that they came, you gotta find a place that is kind of free from consequence. You know, it's like nowhere.
Well, when you showed that first picture, and I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it had the butte in the background.
Yeah.
And it had that little bit, you could see the buildings.
Yeah.
But then as a botanist, I'm sitting there looking at that, and when you say it's nothing, I know it's not nothing.
No, I didn't. I'm not saying it's
No,
not.
I know, but this is what they said it was. And
They-
what my heart just almost wept
Right. Yes.
listening to what
Yes.
those people in 1945 thought, because I thought, wow, the Shoshone were there,
It's sagebrush steppe.
Yeah,
It's like-
the beautiful
it's-
plants are
yeah.
there, and yet they're calling it nothing or nowhere
Yeah,
or
all
whatever.
the,
Yeah.
snakes and ground,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's full of animals, creatures, and pollinators, and
Yeah.
sage grouse, and
It's the hubris of men. Sorry.
Mankind.
Okay, mankind, but most of those people making these decisions were not women.